So this week on the Eldritch Lorecast,
we're going to play a little game that I like to call Good News, Bad News.
How is a role-playing game different from role-playing? Why does system matter?
With what's going on with Geek and Sundry at the moment.
I don't know. They've just mysteriously reappeared.
Changes to the way that Patreon monetizing its platform.
YouTube takes 30% of my earnings. And then it's like, okay, so then in order to cover for that, I'll have to have an external tip jar that people can give to me directly. Oh, but that's going to take 30%? Cool.
Paizo just changed their licensing. A lot of people who have created content, including people that have created like character builders, will not be able to continue to host their character builder.
You know, in many ways, it's a company that's just as callous towards its workers as Wizards of the Coast.
All right, let's do some questions. It's been so long since we've done
Yes!
it.
Yes! More right now.
We did it. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. That's right. My name is Ben Byrne. If you've never watched this before, I'm joined by... Nah, I f***ed it. All right, let's go again. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in the realms. My name's Ben Byrne, and I'm shaking off the rust of con crud and traveling and all that sort of stuff. I'm joined, as always, by Shawn Merwin, James Hake, Dael Kingsmill, the classic team back together. And this week, we're going to play a little game that I like to call Good News, Bad News. I'm a little over the bad news, the negativity, the kind of toxicity at the moment. The toxicity levels are getting too high. Let's bring them down. Let's get some good news, starting with, did anybody see Deborah Ann Woll introduce John Bernthal to D&D?
I did! Yes!
She could make reading the phone book sound interesting. She is a titan.
And I love that it's like, hey, you don't need no dice, no character sheet, nothing. It's really just one of us explains the world and you choose what you do. That's it, back and forth.
If you have ever been asked, what's D&D like, and you try to explain it, you either under-explain it or over-explain it, or you end up doing something goofy. Just watch how Deborah Ann Woll talks John Bernthal through it. Because it's perfect. It's pitch perfect. And even though she's made maybe a little mistake here and there, I'm like, no, that's cool. That's cool. I'm not going to nitpick. And what's even more interesting is, Wizards should sit down and watch that video, and then they should go out and send their designers out to do the exact same thing with random people at game stores and at conventions and at schools, and see what questions they're asked. Like John asks, because that tells you exactly the kind of rules that you need to make sure that the game flows well from those questions, right? What's the first thing he asks? Where did it happen? Oh, we've got rules for that, right? Perception check. Okay, cool. The second is, what do I know about owlbears? And that's where it gets weird. That's where the game starts to get weird, because it doesn't tell you what you know, but should you have to make a check to know what you know? It's those sorts of things that the game needs to handle, and it doesn't necessarily handle it well. Now, game masters like Deborah can, but So I could talk about this the whole show, and I could sit and watch that 8-minute clip 100 times and pick something up each time.
Ben, I'm staging a mutiny. I've got a question I'd like to ask about this, because watching this got me very interested in a conversation that you were just touching on here, Shawn, just the barest bit. And it's about, how is a role-playing game different from role-playing? Why does system matter? Is it important? Because there are so many role-playing games being created right now, period, but also specifically around our beloved genre of heroic fantasy. And we're watching them evolve with our own eyes. I often get this feeling in my heart that it doesn't really matter which of them are better per se. The ones that will succeed are going to be the ones that have the biggest community and the best marketing. D&D will do well. It will inevitably do well. And we're going to see how the community rallies around Drawsteel, Daggerheart, Tales of the Valiant, DC 20, Pathfinder 2, the list goes on. What the hell is actually important about an RPG system.
If I can jump in here quickly, I think what this clip highlights more than anything is that the system isn't super important, or at least it's not what makes RPGs special.
Yeah.
And this was the argument that I was trying to make a couple of weeks ago when talking about the exploration pillar. Rolling the dice is not playing the game. Playing the game is making choices.
So what are we doing all this for?
Well, rolling the dice makes the world feel real in some sense. It makes the world feel like it's reacting to you and to your ability to be able to accomplish things. It puts in limitations that you're not always going to be able to. You can't just say, I have a Tommy gun and I have this as well, and I shoot the owlbear, and it die, or like, oh well, this owlbear likes me, so I'm just gonna like the dice and the rules and the mechanics kind of help create the structure of the world. It's like, I think Abed has a quote in Community where he says like, the world is boundless. I create a world that is as boundless as my imagination, but I bind it with rules. And that's kind of like the rules are there to create a sense of veracity. But playing the game, I was thinking about this when playing God of War, right? Playing something like God of War is expression in the way that I interact with the game, because somebody might decide, I want to play this game super defensively. I'm going to take all the defensive options with the armor. I'm going to have my shield out all the time. This is how I want to play as Kratos. Whereas I might go, I'm in a really aggressive mood today. I just want to rip things to shreds. I'm going to put the difficulty down slightly, and I'm going to take, buff my damage as much as possible because I want to get in there. And I'm making choices like an artist makes choices on a canvas. I'm making choices every time I choose whether to block or to dodge out of the way, in those microseconds. It's self-expression through gameplay. And when it comes to tabletop RPGs, what makes them special, I think, and what this clip with Deborah and John kind of demonstrates is that the specialness is the human interaction and the making choices and the telling a story together that the rules give you structure for. And whatever structure you prefer defines what system you might want to choose, or maybe genre defines what system you want to choose.
We've got a couple people in chat giving their answers. They say dice and tables and rules text are the metaphysical filaments that the shared fantasy world is constructed with. We've got, this is one of the reasons I really like narrative games, because they don't have those kinds of rules.
Sure.
Rolling the dice makes it seem like the DM isn't just saying no. And I also think that that there's something to be said for the jungle gym created by those limitations of the dice, at the very least, or the Jenga tower or the deck of cards or whatever it may be. There's something to be said for how that can make role-playing, which exists in other formats, it exists in play-by-post, it exists in LARPing, it can make it less scary for you as an adult who has your office job to come in and play pretend for a bit, because the dice tell you some of what's happening and you can build your story off that rather than just having to completely come up with it off the cuff.
Yeah, and Deborah Ann says that to John, right? She says, this is a way that we can express ourselves. We introverts can express ourselves because it is structured in such a way. And I've seen that so many times where I'll play a very structured, rules heavy game, and people are comfortable actually interacting with that. When I try to go to a looser, more narrative game, everyone freezes up because they don't have that structure with which to tell the stories and express themselves in the way that they want to.
And I think some people need more of that, like you're saying, it's you can have some people need nothing. Some people just a little prompt will be enough to get them going. Other people, you got to put in a lot of stuff in place for them to feel safe. To start playing in that way.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about ludonarrative dissonance last week, but we didn't get to it. So maybe if we hurry, we can get to it this week, and then we'll come back to this.
This is, man, Shawn, you and I are on the same wavelength today, because I was about to say the conclusion I reached when I was thinking about this before the show was that every role-playing game system is just a vibe and rules that more or less match that vibe. And the quality of your system is not in how ingenious it is and not in how airtight its mechanics are, but it's in how well the rules emulate the vibe that you're selling.
Yeah.
And that's why people get all up in arms about system matters and stuff like that, is because D&D's vibe is kind of whatever you want it to be, which inevitably creates these moments of jank where the rules do not match the vibe that you have either imagined or that has, in the way that Deborah Ann has just done it, been sold to you. Because D&D's vibe, in terms of its mechanics, they do not match the vibe that Deborah is selling there, not one-to-one.
There are choices and self-expression to be made within the mechanics of the game that you're playing as well. And that might be the choices that you make at character creation or as you level up that help you self-express the sort of character that you want to play with the mechanics that are provided. But it's also the moment-to-moment kind of use of self-expression in the game by saying, like, I want to investigate this thing further, you know, and then a check is made. And the skill of D&D, if there is a skill to playing it, isn't rolling the highest number on a dice to be able to, like, unlock a door. It's knowing to make the choice about whether your character is the best one to unlock the door or not, and which skill you might want to employ or what strategy you might want to try to unlock the door, whether it's, you know, blasting the door open, kicking it down, or having someone unlock it if that's not yourself. So the mechanics provide those choices and that avenue for self-expression as much as kind of the freeform narrative moment to moment does as well. I feel like I'm on late night radio, but maybe that's just my mood today. Welcome to the Eldritch Lorecast. Anyway, now we've got to dart to a little bit of bad news. Womp womp. The bad news is, unfortunately, and this is breaking relatively, there are delays outside of North America for the 2024 Player's Handbook alternative cover. Now, there's a lot of words in that because it's a specific delay that doesn't affect everybody, so it's worth saying again. If you are outside America and you have pre-ordered or you want to get your hands on the alternative cover of the 2024 Player's Handbook, UK and Europe will not be receiving that, unfortunately, until October 18th, Australia, October 24th, and New Zealand and Southeast Asia, October 31st. I'm not sure why New Zealand's different to Australia. Who knows? Surely we can send a couple across the pond.
They don't want us to have them.
This was, just announced, I believe, as of 5 hours ago on D&D Beyond. No one's fault, printing error or printing delay, something like that. As someone who works for a publishing company, this unfortunately happens from time to time.
End of conversation.
All right, on to maybe some good news. I'm not sure. Dael, I'm going to be honest, I didn't go and research this after the fact. Can you regale us with what's going on with Geek and Sundry at the moment?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. They've just mysteriously reappeared. And I just wanted to touch on that because what? So the first I heard anything about this was back in June, actually. Terry Latorco, who was one of the other Geek and Sundry vloggers, on Facebook posted a screenshot from the Geek and Sundry website. And said, did I just sleep through this planned relaunch or what? Because Terry was the editor-in-chief for the Geek and Sundry blog website for a while. And so it was just oh, I didn't hear anything about this. So the website says, coming soon, some kind of adventure maybe? And everyone in the replies, it was so funny to look at because it was vloggers, editors, producers, social media people from Geek and Sundry in the years of yore were just what? No one knew what was going on. And then we didn't hear anything for a long time. And then Geek and Sundry just reappeared. They posted a trailer for this Sagas of Sundry show they're going to do. It's called Goblin Mayhem, something like that. And it's going to be run by Amy Vorpal. So, it's not some completely new face. Very exciting stuff. And also they've been posting fairly solid quality memes on social media. So they have they've got a competent social media person still there to do that for them, and I love that. They're doing a great job. Shout out to that social media person. We're all just very confused. It's still under Legendary, but I'm happy to see a Sagas of Sundry thing happen. Confused, but happy.
I'm open to Geek and Sundry making a bold comeback. I was sad when it left. Things got really bad for Geek and Sundry there at the end. And if they can keep a good work culture and make some good stuff, hell yeah. I hope this rocks.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good for those people.
Yeah, man.
We've got a couple of the former Nerdist people working on it by the sounds of things.
Is Nerdist still around? Is that still a thing?
In about the same capacity as Geek and Sundry. Well, slightly more than Geek and Sundry, because Geek and Sundry for a long time has just kind of been a shell that reposts all of the Nerdist posts.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
But yeah.
As we have had good news, we must also have bad news. Wah, wah. And this, Michael in chat actually brought this to my attention. I went and had a quick look at a video from the DM Lair, who is talking about changes to the way that Patreon is monetizing its platform for its creators through its subscription model. This is a little bit of a complex situation. I don't entirely have my head entirely wrapped around it, but the cliff notes are, as far as I understand, Patreon relevant to the tabletop RPG industry because many people, Champeku and other map makers, adventure creators, YouTubers who put out RPG content through Patreon use this service to basically make a living. It has 3 ways for it to subscribe if you're not currently aware, which is pay per creation, which allows you to contribute to a creator every time they post something new, a new creation on their Patreon. This could be a couple times a month. You could also pay up front, which means you'll build immediately, and then you'll build again monthly for as long as you stay subscribed to that creator. Or you can pay, I believe it's from the start of the month. So when you subscribe, you don't pay instantly, but from the first of the next month, then you pay the start of each month kind of subsequently. This is where this gets a little tangential, because Apple is requiring not the fruit, the digital media conglomerate or the general media conglomerate, the phone maker, the dudes who make the phones. They have terms of service. This is kind of well known, which require anybody who has an app in the App Store to pay a 30% cut of transactions made through that app to Apple, which is not a small amount to be taking from transactions. Apple enforced this, I believe, if you purchase the app in the store, if it has a cost, but also through in-app purchases. I didn't realize this until this was in the GM's Lair's video, but this is why, like, if you try to renew your Spotify subscription or something on the iOS app, it will redirect you to a browser window so that Apple doesn't get 30% of your Spotify subscription, because that allows the rules to change. And famously, Apple have been trying to, not let people wiggle out of this 30% cut in different ways. Famously, there was a lawsuit with Epic, who make Fortnite, a couple of years ago, which I believe they won, though I couldn't tell you what the fallout was. There are potentially ways around this, but basically because of that 30% cut that Apple want to take from in-app purchases, this isn't really going to be compatible with Patreon's pay per creation or non-upfront payment methods, meaning that they want to move all creators over to an upfront payment method and potentially charge more if you're using the iOS app for Patreon, which is how apparently most people interact with Patreon these days, which is bad news to come to the point for creators, because it means that they will ultimately be the ones who make less money because either they're not getting paid per creation anymore from those who choose to pay them that way, and they have to potentially give part of their revenue over to Apple every time somebody purchases through the App Store.
I don't know whether people remember, but a while back, there was like this big uproar when Patreon tried to implement basically the transaction fees that go through, because, it has to charge a bunch of people's cards, right? So if you're giving a creator $2 a month, that's you're getting a lot of very small sort of donations via Patreon, and so those transaction fees end up cutting into that earning. And Patreon tried to make a change so that the patrons were the ones who were tanking that transaction fee. So you're gonna say I'm giving $2 a month, but actually you're giving $2 and however many cents to cover the transaction fee. And there was a really big push against it by creators, because they knew that would really impact their income on Patreon, because a lot of people weren't going to like it. They didn't like it. They didn't like this kind of weird little background scheming that was kind of being conducted against the people who don't just, consume their stuff, but are actively choosing to support it. And so they had to sort of backpedal and make it so that creators were absorbing that transaction fee. And it's really interesting reading the email from Patreon sort of letting you know about this change, which, by the way, only just came in. It really did, like last week, which kind of surprises me because this change is coming into effect in November of this year. And then will be completely 100% rolled out to everyone. So Apple's making that change and it's going to impact everyone starting November this year. November next year is when Patreon will finish transitioning everyone over to the sort of monthly subscription method automatically. So it's happening very, very quickly. But the email was very heavy on this is Apple's fault, which it is, sure. But I also am aware that it's something that Patreon has kind of been quietly encouraging everyone to do anyway. They don't want you to use a paper creation method, for example. I use a paper creation method because when I was first I don't know, I have this whole thing where I stress out about other people spending money on me. So when I was creating my Patreon, I really loved that paper creation because it means that when I have these long periods where I don't get a video out because I'm working on other stuff, I don't have to worry about people having given me money and me not having given it back. I don't have to feel like they should be getting something, so I'm going to put all of my energy and time into making something for the patrons, and then I don't get anything up on my YouTube channel. Like it covers a lot of those issues. But if you didn't, back in the day, choose a pay-per creation method, you can't swap from subscription-based back to pay-per creation, right? So I'm quite confident that Patreon does prefer this method.
Yeah.
But it is interesting seeing them push all of that blame onto Apple in this email quite heavily, because that can look like, hey, make a fuss at Apple and maybe they'll change it, which they won't because they're Apple and they're too big to worry about that. Or it can just be kind of saving face when they have been swayed by public backlash in the past. But it is, it's going to suck. It's going to really, really suck. A lot of people are going to lose a lot of income there. I've been caught in the middle of a fairly dramatic shift where I've been, beavering away in the background over here, spending a lot of money. I'm in the middle of a move and I'm setting up the infrastructure to do a lot of creations, and it costs a lot of money. And part of what I was banking on is, well, but if I set this up, I'll be able to get out enough videos to pay this expense off in X amount of time. And now that probably isn't going to be the case. So it's going to hit a lot of people really hard, particularly small creators.
Wah, wah. Yeah, everybody's relatively quick to blame Apple for the state of the App Store. And 30%'s not small. That's a chunk of change
huge.
On every transaction.
YouTube takes 30% of my earnings. And then it's like, okay, so then in order to cover for that, I'll have to have an external tip jar that people can give to me directly. Oh, but that's going to take 30%? Cool. What?
Michael in chat was asking, is it just as easy for folks to set up something like a Squarespace to take payments and subscriptions? And subscription services are A, not easy to set up, but also B, Patreon kind of has a little bit of that YouTube Spotify-ness to it. Apple Podcasts used to have this for podcasters, which was like, if you can get your podcast on Apple Podcasts, it's a real podcast. You know what I mean? Being on Patreon gives the consumer a sense of safety in some sense that this is a legitimate creator, which maybe that's ironic because anybody can get on Patreon and create a Patreon. But, Patreon has that platform where you recognize the name of the platform. So you're, I think, probably more likely to subscribe to a Patreon than you are to a creator who you don't know as much about in a third-party kind of space, like a Squarespace or something like that. So I think that's why it would be harder. It's like making a YouTube channel on Vimeo. Nobody's going to Vimeo to watch YouTube-style videos. Even the fact that I call them YouTube videos kind of tells you a lot there. Now for some good news. Critical Role and Among Us have done a marketing deal. Inner Sloth and Critical Role have teamed up for a bunch of Among Us cosmetics, items and costumes from the Mighty Nine, Vox Machina, and Bell's Hells. I know you can get Pate as a little flying companion that flies around behind you. It's super adorable. You can dress up as some of the characters from the Critical Role parties. I just love this because during 2020 lockdowns, my D&D group just played Among Us week in, week out, like 8 months solid, we played Among Us. And so by the time it came to playing Among Us in the Ghostfire office, I'm not kidding, and Dante, I'm pretty sure, can verify this, I slaughtered the entire crew multiple times. There are ways to play Among Us, I discovered, that not everybody knows. And it was a lot of fun. I'm great at it. I'm not going to lie. That's all. That's why I wanted to bring this up, was just to brag about how good I am at Among Us. And I'd love to dress up as Molly Mock. Why not?
Who all else fell into the whirlpool of Among Us content during the pandemic? Yeah. Okay, great. I'm not alone. Because Ben, I think that you would get a real kick out of watching some of these videos. I'm going to send you some links.
Okay, yeah, do so. I do love some Among Us. I mean, I found it through kind of streamers.
Sure.
As a lot of people did, but I don't think I was a committed
I think you would know
watcher.
if you fell into the whirlpool. I think you'd know.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Because it was inescapable for a while there. I'm actually surprised that they didn't do this sooner. It feels like kind of a natural bit in a very bizarre way to put little cosmetics related to Critical Role.
There were Critical Role Among Us streams at the height of it, weren't there? Or
that wouldn't surprise me.
I want to say yes. I have no evidence to back this up, but it feels true.
It feels like the sort of thing they would have done. Yeah. I wonder if Among Us is about to have a big resurgence, right? I wonder if they've got something new on the horizon and this is like the vanguard of something happening.
Maybe.
I think they did release new maps recently, so I don't know.
Well, it's worth noting, just for folks who are interested in this, I believe they're selling this through what they're referring to as a cube or a cosmic cube. It's like a little pack that you can purchase through the store, online store in Among Us. This is only available until November 12th / late night November 11th, depending on your time zone in the US.
Really?
So if this sounds interesting, if you play Among Us, if you think you might play it in the future, I mean, I'm not trying to encourage you to go spend your money necessarily, but if this sounds like something you want, do note it is a limited time thing.
Wow, they're trying to artificial scarcity us. Damn.
Digital companies, that's how they function these days. Time for some bad news? I don't know. Look, Shawn, can you take this one? I don't really know much about it.
I really can't. Someone said, hey, Paizo just changed their licensing. They changed their fan policy so that a lot of people who have created content, including people that have created like character builders, will not be able to continue to host their character builder because their license changed. Is this like what Wizards tried to do with the open gaming license? And I'm like, I don't know, and I don't care. So I passed it on to see if anybody else wanted to talk about it. So apparently, if you created stuff under their fan license, you might want to check out and see if you can continue to do that, because the answer is probably not.
Yeah, I believe, and this got very, I was having flashbacks, right, to early last year, because this gets very legalese, kind of confusing about what license interacts with what other license. There's talk about the orc, the famous kind of reaction to the open gaming license thing from last year. My understanding is that Pathfinder have Pathfinder Infinite and Starfinder Infinite, which are kind of their DMs Guild equivalents of third-party creators can go in and create products using Pathfinder IP. And they've changed their license so that to create Pathfinder content or Starfinder content, it has to be through Infinite. I don't know if that means that you can't do third-party Pathfinder stuff at all in any other platform, because that would kind of invalidate their whole kind of the orc argument if Pathfinder is functionally no longer really compatible with the orc. Because I believe if you're publishing under Pathfinder Infinite, you can't also publish that content under the orc. That's kind of like a barrier that they've put in place. The bit where I'm hazy on this is DM's Guild, you can publish Beholders and Mind Flayers and Forgotten Realms content in your 5th edition adventure, but you can still publish 5e content off of DM's Guild under the Creative Commons and OGL without using the specific IP from the Forgotten Realms or that sort of thing. I don't know if Paizo are cutting people off from Pathfinder entirely, unless it's under Infinite, or whether it's just using their IP, specific things from Golarion, that has to go under Infinite.
It's really interesting looking at this news and comparing it to the OGL crisis that it, grew out of, because in many ways, this seems like a smaller scale version of that. And it just brings me back to all the times I hear on social media or wherever that sort of champion is the people's gaming company, the champion of the people. And in some ways that's true. Like the Paizo Workers Union has done a lot of work, but it just drags me back to the first couple of times I went to cons and talked to the RPG freelancers and heard the real tea about working for Paizo, because it is in many ways it's a company that's just as callous towards its workers as Wizards of the Coast is, because they want to make a profit and they want to climb the ladder. And so this is one of those situations where I have to be like, well, we should not be surprised that this happened, because like it or not, Paizo is still a profit-driven company, and they're going to do whatever they can to cling on to that IP and make that IP as profitable for them as they can make it. And it's just a matter of whether or not they feel like they're able to get away with it.
Yeah, I agree. I apologize if folks are listening to this and they're like, what's happening? Because that probably wasn't a particularly salient explanation, but wah wah. All right, moving on.
There's a lot of news going on. A lot of news.
Let's get to the questions. Let's get to the questions.
Hopefully some good news. This is the last bit of news, and then we'll get to the questions, I promise. Last bit of news, which is also semi-breaking, I believe, is Roll20 have started their own kind of pre-order incentives for the 2024 core D&D books, which is kind of interesting to me. So Roll20 are getting them, apparently, which I think is almost news within itself. I don't know whether that's just news to me, but Roll20 are going to have the 2024 rules. And they've started a pre-order kind of campaign where they're providing people with bonus copies of third-party publications, and each day a new publication unlocks while one from a previous day kind of like goes away. And basically, the earlier you pre-order, the more bonus content you are going to get, because if you pre-order, let's say on Wednesday, you get Wednesday's bonus, you get Thursday's bonus, you get Friday's bonus, you get Saturday's bonus. But if you pre-order on Friday, you don't get the Wednesday or Thursday bonus, right? The earlier you get in on the ground floor, the more content you're going to get.
Kairos.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know where Mordenkainen's Tome of Marvelous Magic by MT Black. There you go. That's one of the bonuses that is either today or tomorrow. What is MT Black getting out of this deal if it's a bonus?
He's a fellow Australian. Just ask him.
Yeah, we should ask.
Go across the street and ask him.
Should I just call him? Should I just be like, hey, MT, what are you live on air? What's the deal?
Exactly.
I don't know. All I mean to say by that, I don't mean to be getting into other people's business, but I'm hoping that creators are being
MT, reach out.
Yeah. Let us know. All right, let's do some questions. It's been so long since we've done email questions.
Yes!
Shawn, you're so excited, Shawn. You can tell everybody, what's the email address?
You can ask a question like the ones we're about to answer finally at podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
It's been 1,000 years.
It feels it.
It was not my fault last week. I was not here. You could have done listener questions the whole time.
But Ben,
I had to do
a 4-hour monologue.
And your initial question was so good that we ended up discussing it for too long. So I still blame you, even though you weren't here.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
So take that.
Yeah, get worse, Ben. How dare you be so good?
Well, we've spent so
this
long.
Week, I was so actively mindful. I was like, we're talking about like behind the scenes YouTube transparency of the system again. So just like rein it in this time. I was so aware.
No, I think it's useful for people to know. But unfortunately, we've talked about answering questions for so long. We've run out of time to answer questions. So we'll be back
See you
next.
next
No, I'm
week.
just kidding. Yeah. All right. This first question coming in from Marco. This has been on the bill for a while. I do apologize for people who keep emailing, keep building up our mailbag so we can have a backlog of these. Writing your first adventure. What is the most important thing to focus on for a first-time adventure writer? Is it the words and sentence structure? Is it the game design? Is it the feel/atmosphere? Is it the physical layout of the product, the art, or something else entirely? And then this might have been Marco or me editorializing. I can't quite remember. But what was your experience of your first adventure that you wrote?
Now, let's set some terms down here. Are we talking about write for publication, or are we talking about write for playing with your home group?
Look, I'm going to say publication because I think publication probably covers a lot of like what's right for your home group too, at least in some capacity. And I will say straight off the bat, if you're a writer, art, don't worry about that too much first time around. It's important from a marketing perspective, and it is important from an attention-grabbing perspective, but that's not what
like
you,
we'll
the
touch
writer,
on it later,
should be
but yeah.
focused on. Yeah, exactly. Layout, I'm having this headache right now, and I love layout, don't get me wrong, but it gets into a situation where it's like, you know, you have to write exactly this many words for this page to look good, and if you don't, then you have to cut content, and if you do, then you have to write extra blah, 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 blah. Don't worry about layout the first time. Just write your adventure. Is my personal opinion.
Yeah, first of all, let it be janky. Yeah, go ahead, Shawn.
Ben, I had answers for both, whether it's as a publisher or as a creator. Ben just covered the publisher because I am also going with Ben through this this process. And yeah, we may have had a little discussion at 7 a.m. this morning and before this podcast. If you are a creator, here is my best suggestion, whether it's going to be published or whether you just run it for your home group, is focus on the encounters as opposed to the story.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is you can have an adventure with this magnificent story. If the players are not interacting with that story at an encounter level, then the story may as well not be there because they need to feel it. And the way they feel it is through the encounters that you put them through. I have seen great stories fail in an adventure because the encounters were dull or non-existent. I have seen basic story of go retrieve the prince from the ogre's keep sing because of the incredible encounters that the characters had to go through in order to get the prince out of the ogre's castle. So focus on that area where your players will be interacting with your NPCs, your monsters, your world, your setting. If you can do that, if you can focus in on that and make that sing, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, I think just kind of building on that idea, when I think about the adventures I've written, a lot of the time they've started with an encounter idea. The most recent one, which we ran at Gen Con, we'll be running at Gamehole Con, just started with an idea of a wolf with a sword through its gullet, basically inspired by Fenrir.
I wonder what gave you that idea.
The adventure I wrote a little while ago, Volta the Living Flame, the final encounter was kind of this slightly complex puzzle encounter where the party had to stop a magical prison door from opening. And all I had in mind when I started writing that adventure was, I know what I want the climax to be. It's a giant ice door and it's melting and the players have to stop it from melting. And that's the encounter, so to speak. And the story kind of flowed from there. So, yeah, I agree.
That's a well-trodden philosophy by Nintendo, whose gameplay always comes first over even the stories of their story-driven games. If there's not a cool, unique, engaging game design idea behind it all, the game is not getting made. One thing that I think people talk about all the time, but it's worth reiterating here, is to manage the scope of your adventure. Writing an adventure is hard work. Writing one, because you can write all day long. You can get as expansive and as sprawling as you want, but ultimately the thing has to be playable, and the thing has to be comprehensible. And depending on how long you actually want it to be, the players actually have to be able to play it in a single day, or maybe 2 sessions or something like that. I was mentoring a high school student who reached out to me, a graduating senior who reached out to me and wanted to do some game design work. And the kid's name is Liam, and their work is now in the DM's Guild. But basically, they came to me saying, I want to do some work, and I have this whole campaign setting that I want to create. And I was like, I'm going to stop you right there, because you're starting with this idea to create your magnum opus, and you're not just going to be disappointed, you're going to burn out. You're never going to want to do this again, because your vision, your reach just so far outstrips your grasp here. And it is so much better to just like start small and fail fast, because your first adventure is going to suck at least a little bit. There's probably going to be some great stuff about it, but it's also going to be some stuff about it that you've never done this before. You've never figured out how this works. And it's going to be an exploratory experience to you. And even if it's not so great, you should put it out there anyway. You should get it on DM's Guild or on Drive-Thru or whatever. Because if you create it and put it in a shelf, no one will ever hear about it. People love people love to see things done, even if they're not fully complete, because they can tell when there's a spark of genius in what's being made, even if that's an uncut gem.
Not to addendum everybody's answer, but just again, in support and agreement, the first adventure I wrote was a 5-part sort of mini campaign designed to be played in 5 one-shots. And when I was in the guts of it, that felt astronomical. Like I was like, I've bitten off too much. Like I need to start with a one-shot. So starting small is, and finishing that, I think is great advice.
See, I have less experience in publishing adventures than these esteemed individuals. But as someone who loves to sit down and read a little adventure here and there, I know that the thing I love most is that was me last night reading some Dread adventures. Ooh, little Dread scenarios. Ooh, cozy. And then I spooked myself. But you sit down to read it, and the thing that grabs me is always like just the mood, the vibe, the vague and evocative sort of shape of the entire thing. There it is, baby. On xfactory.com. But it just has to have this little sparkle that has been mentioned a couple of times. It's got to have that little fire in there. And then kind of the rest of it is just, like Shawn said, just encounters. Because the rest of the way through, I'm going to be like, I think I would tweak this to do this instead, because that serves like the original concept you sold me on. Oh, I'm going to shift this encounter so that it's earlier, because I think that will do this for the pacing that I enjoy. I'm going to sit here and read it and tweak it. No matter what happens, the people who are going to run this thing are going to run it different to how you wrote it. That's just kind of, that's the bag. That's how it is. So focusing on that, on flavor and fun encounters that can be mixed and matched and tweaked. For me as a consumer of these products, that is something that I love, because it's not a bad thing for me to look at it and want to change it. That means I'm engaged. That means I'm excited. That means that you've won me. So that's kind of the main piece of advice I can give.
I think it was Scott Gray, who has been on the show before, who wrote something like, game writing should be beautiful. And it's, depending on your definition of beautiful, that's absolutely true. As Dael said, when we read fiction, right, if it's good fiction, the writer draws us in, and we can visualize these characters going through these things. With game writing, adventure writing specifically, you're doing the same thing, but you don't have main characters. So what you have to do is set up these situations in which first the game master, then the players can insert themselves into the situation. So you want to create these situations that are dynamic and fun or funny or horrifying or whatever genre that you're working with. Reading an adventure should be just as enticing, just as imagination invoking as a piece of fiction would. You do that by doing all of those things that you would do in fiction, but you just have to remember that it's a user manual too. So you have to keep the beauty in that sense is the clarity. The beauty in that sense is things that could happen. In the first adventure I ever wrote, it was a 2-hour adventure introducing the region of Keoland in Living Greyhawk to new players. So what I tried to do was, okay, what do I have to introduce? I have to introduce the monarchy. I have to introduce this barony that has these weird things going on. So how do I do this? And so I tried to figure out what would be most fun for the players. Escorting a child to this barony where there's a bard college, but they were told you cannot look in the carriage. You will ride next to the carriage. The carriage carrying the person has curtains. You are not allowed to look in. At certain points, you will have to turn your back. The person will get out of the carriage, and then they will get back in the carriage, and then you can continue on your journey. And so, right, you're setting up this tension, and people are going to try to peek in, or, and there are also other guards there, so you have to be careful. Of course, immediately something happens, and you see who's in the carriage, and then it becomes that sort of interaction. But you want to introduce something that draws the imagination of what could happen.
And also to touch briefly on that sort of marketing branding stuff that we did mention.
Sure.
It's not the heart of the thing. But if you are like selling this, if you're trying to make it succeed as a product, or even if you're just trying to, get people to look at it, you know what I mean? Like you're putting it up on Reddit and you want to entice people. Look, I'm going to be real with you. Visuals are helpful. And I have taken two different avenues in the past. One is the one where I am not willing to spend a lot of time, and so I put a lot of money forward and I pay an artist to make art that will sell people on the concept. The other option is the one where I'm not willing to spend a lot of money, so I spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time in the public domain art mines finding artwork that I can use that is appropriate to the setting. Look, it just making things pretty. Humans are just bowerbirds. We're just looking for pretty things. But if you cannot spend your time in the public domain art mines and you just want to go with just a pure text document, then I think the biggest thing that you can do is spend time in the communities where you're sharing this thing, right? Because you can't just kind of take. You gotta be present and engaged in other people's stuff.
And you got to do it for real too. You can't be doing that with the mindset of, and eventually I will turn all this around and it will pay out big bucks. No, man, you got to love the community, like for real. You need to for real love your community. I think it's also worth talking about, even if like Shawn said, you focus in on the encounters over the story, it's worth focusing on what kind of adventure you're trying to make. And by this, I mean, in traditional D&D adventure storytelling, there's kind of this dichotomy of the site-driven adventure, the location-driven adventure. And I don't remember exactly what Event-driven. That's what the other word was, where, for example, a lot of classic Gygax-style D&D adventures, Village of Hamlet and Keep on the Borderlands and stuff, is mostly the adventure lays out a place with a lot of little sub-places nested within it, and those places have treasure and monsters and maybe a sparsely detailed NPC or two. Your site-based adventures can have very, very fleshed out NPCs if that's what's important to you. But the most important thing is the story is about exploring the place and kind of creating. Your work as the adventure designer is to create a possibility space to be explored for the players to superimpose their own story, their own sort of chronicle of events that can be imagined as a story afterward. That's a very OSR way of looking at it. And you'll get a lot of big kudos from the OSR community if that's your audience, if that's the community you feel emotionally invested in. Event-driven adventures tend to have a more new school feel to them. For example, the Daggerheart playtest adventure, Marauders of Windfall, has a very, this happens and then this happens. And it's not so much a railroad, but it's about presenting big things and the story being how your characters react to the big things that are happening. And often you get into things like flowcharts, right? If this, then this. Whereas in a site-based adventure, it's the flowchart is a bit more obscure, right? The flowchart is which way you turn down the dungeon hallway, and the boxes on the chart are the rooms. So do think about that. You don't have to box yourself in. Plenty of adventures have a sort of more event-driven village at the beginning. And then a dungeon at the end. Matt Colville's favorite adventure, The Cult of the Reptile God, starts in a little village, and then you go through a wilderness, and those are both very event-driven. And then you get to a dungeon, then you explore it, and that's all very site-based. So just think about what your priorities are in terms of storytelling, because those are kind of two big genres in the D&D school of making RPG adventures. Making a vampire adventure, look elsewhere. All of those rules go out the window.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, it's interesting because I'd never really thought about it like that, although maybe we've had these sort of discussions here before. But speaking of vampire, not too long ago, I think I was reading through the Vampire Masquerade rule book, and it was talking about how the storyteller structures a session.
Were you just reading through it and being angry? Of vampires.
No, Dael, I was reading through it because I thought I might like to run some Vampire Masquerade.
You were like, I can change it.
Yeah, wow, maybe. And the way that it suggests that the storyteller, the game master, the GM, the DM of Vampire kind of structures their sessions is scene-based. And I think Cthulhu might give similar advice. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've read through Call of Cthulhu. But I had to really wrap my head around that because as someone who I would say, even at the start of my adventures, they do have a beginning place, but I think about them almost in a video game sense, a Skyrim-y, Witcher-y kind of open world video game sense of being site-based or location-based adventures, because there are specific locations that, are written into the adventure as you can go visit, but they're in theory open and you can go to them in any order. But maybe actually that's not site-based, that's event-based, because those scenes are still relatively established, even though I think of them in my head as like locations in a physical space, if that makes sense. So like those two things don't feel like they exist on a one or the other, but almost like a sliding scale medium of like, yes, once you're in a dungeon, that's fairly location-based. That's kind of which corridor, A or B. When you're in the village, you might think, do we want to go to the fisherman's hut or do we want to go to the Earl's castle? But are those actually location-based, or is that more event-based because really you're deciding which scene you want to play out next in the unfolding story?
It's not a perfect dichotomy. So you could say something is site-based because it's at a site, but if you have to wait for an event to take place, then it's really an event-based thing. So if your flow chart is you get to this site and something happens, whether you're in a dungeon or moving along a timeline, that really still is a site-based thing because the characters are triggering the action by going to the site. Event-based would be something like you're in a dungeon, but at a certain point, a triggering event happens. And so the event sort of comes to the characters rather than the characters going to the event. And you can have an adventure that does both. The monster hunt is a little bit of a both thing.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah. I'm like,
there are certain choices. With certain choices you make, an event will take place. Yes. And if you make a different choice, a different event would take place. So that sort of dissects the two choices, and it's an event-based adventure at certain sites.
Yeah. And I just want to follow this up by saying, as with any taxonomy created by people to, apply definitions to observable phenomenon, they're going to get blurry at the edges, and they're only useful as long as they are. The minute this dichotomy stops helping you, like plan and prepare and create, throw it away.
Well, I would assume also that it's not a qualitative statement of like it's better to do event or site, because in my head I was like, I do like location-based adventures, surely. I think about them like a video game. But then I was having this existential thing thinking about the Monster Hunt, Shawn, where I was like, oh, but I guess they're all just events that trigger when the party arrive there. So they're not really location-based at all.
This is all making me think of, so there's a sort of indie RPG about spies called Blowback. And then Justin Alexander sort of took an element of that and remodeled it. And that's how I found it. But it's node-based adventures, which is, I mean, I guess the combo of event and location. Right. And I mean, off the top of my head, the way it works is kind of like, okay, you get your clues and there are 3 clues. And so even if you miss some of them, it's like, this one leads to node A, this one leads to node B, this one leads to node C, and you make your choice between them. And one of them can be like, go to the murder scene at the mayor's office or whatever, right? And so it becomes... Yeah, I guess that's location based though. Is that location based? I don't know. And then they lead to each other. But at least calling it node based removes the sense of doubt.
Sure.
One reason that it's good to try to put things into a category is to look for problems or pitfalls. So an event based adventure can be wonderful because it can be a little bit more diverse than just going from room A to room B to room C. The problem, though, is when does the event happen? I've seen so many adventures where you investigate a little bit and then that night something happens. But if the players don't stop, which often they don't, they go to every room, every town, every house in the village looking for the answer when the answer isn't at any of these locations because the event needs to happen. So an event-based adventure needs to deal with that problem. It's good to be able to categorize, to keep track of how things might go wrong.
What if the event is inextricably linked with the location? What if the thing that needs to happen is an explosion and that happens when they walk through the door? Is that location or?
Well, I think what's interesting about my experience running the Monster Hunt at Gen Con, and this was one of the first times this happened, and if anybody from my group from Gen Con's watching, hello. But what I found was interesting was that oh God, we've got a hype train right at the end of the episode again. What I thought was interesting, thank you everybody so much, we very much appreciate it, was that adventure at some point, kind of halfway through, it is possible to meet an NPC, or a couple of NPCs really at different times, that are at odds with other NPCs. What I found was that my players, when they got these 2 NPCs together, NPC 2 was really meant to support the party in the scene. They weren't meant to be the driving force in the scene. They kind of sit in the back seat, and then when the party want to use them, hey, this person said this, so we know you did that, they can call on that NPC to provide the evidence and the backup and the support that they can provide. What ended up happening was the players said, well, what happens? Let's see what happens when these 2 NPCs interact. And that's fine, and that's a great choice to make, but I found that I just was suddenly doing theater where I was role-playing both these NPCs, and the players kind of stepped out of the adventure a little bit, and the adventure almost after a point could have just played itself out. And I was like, I don't know if that's an inherent problem with the adventure or an inherent problem, not even a problem, or just the way that this group chose to play because they were invested in seeing the story pan out. But I think what it demonstrates, if nothing else, whether or not it's a problem with this specific adventure, is ensuring your event-based adventure still requires the party to be the driving force behind those events kind of playing out and beginning, rather than the events kind of knocking themselves over or playing out after the party knocked the domino over, so to speak. They need to still be the ones that are the center of the story, driving the action, the protagonists, if you will.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we are going to do another pass on the adventure.
Actually, for your first adventure, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good, I think was something we kind of came up against earlier. But also within that, do play the adventure multiple times, play it with multiple groups, revise it.
Get someone else to run it.
Get someone else to run it. That's super important. Get feedback from that person. Watch someone else run it if you can. Play in it, even if you know what's going to happen in the adventure because you wrote it. All those things can kind of help you see it from different angles. And then, as maybe this was a Scott Fitzgerald Gray quote as well, or it was a somebody quote, eventually the adventure is never finished. It simply escapes you at some point. But
so you heard it here first, folks. An adventure is a lizard. When you catch it, it is with you for but a short time before it bites you and runs away.
In my experience so far.
You're not wrong.
If you want to catch the next Lorecast live, we will be back next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. It is Tuesday, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Australian. If you're over here, you can catch us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcasts because we're a real podcast. Stars, likes, subscribes. Thank you so much for the Twitch hype train. Hilariously, we're just going to stop streaming halfway through it, but you guys are awesome.
We
appreciate it. Yeah, you can't chain us to these desks.
We are lizards.
We will bite you and escape.
I'm an American. I don't know how trains work. I got to get out of here.
I'm old. I don't know how hype works.
All right, my name is Ben Byrne, here with Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, James Hake. Dante is the editor, and we'll catch you all next week. Shout out to Dante.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dante is the editor.
And Bob's your uncle.
It's because somebody called you out in chat and just I can't even remember what they said, but then it just put it in my mind. I was like, yeah, I should give Dante a shout out.